Alright, welcome back to another Technique Tuesday. This is the part 2 of piano, the intro series. So, in the part 1 for piano, we talked a little bit about the musical alphabet, a little bit about what makes up a scale, the difference between major and minor scales, what a key is, and you learned how to play the C major scale with both hands. So this week we're going to mainly be talking about chords, rather triads, and inversions, and some common chords that we find in many songs, in major and minor keys. So we're going to mainly use the C major scale still. This makes it just a little bit easier for you to visualize what's happening. So we're going to use the C scale, C major. So that's where we're going to start. Just a refresher, you can always find C when you look at your groups of 2 black notes and you go directly to the left of the first black note, and that is the note C. So, what is a triad? Well, when we talk about chords or harmony in music, that's referring to any time when we have more than one note sounding at a time. And a triad is specifically when we have 3 notes sounding at the same time. The most common triads are major, minor, diminished, augmented, and suspended chords. So a major chord is made up of what we call a root, a major third, and a perfect fifth. So if we're in the key of C and we want to play our tonic chord or our one chord or kind of like our home chord, our home triad, then we would use C as our root. So when we refer to a root, that is talking about whatever is on the bottom of the chord, or what is the lowest pitch of the chord. The root doesn't necessarily have to be on the bottom of the chord. That's kind of what we're going to be talking about today with inversions. But when we play a chord in what we call root position, that is when the root is on the bottom, or it's the lowest pitch of the triad. So if we were to play a C major triad with the root in the bottom, C major root position, we would start with our, if we're using our right hand, you'd start with your thumb on C, and a triad is made up of, remember, a major third and a perfect fifth. These are referring to different types of intervals that we have in music. There's way more than just those, but a major third is when we start with any given key and you play the note that is 4 half steps above. And it makes this nice happy sound. And the perfect fifth, if you remember from when we were learning about the perfect, or the circle of fifths, is a greater distance, but it sounds very balanced. And this is because of the harmonic series, something that we'll probably talk about eventually. But basically, what we're doing when we're on just the white keys in the key of C major is we're skipping every other note. So we play C, E, and G, and skip the D and the F. This is not always the same where you can just kind of skip one white key or black key and then you're just magically going to land on the right note. That's why you have to understand what these intervals actually are. So for a major third, we go up 4 half steps or 4 keys from the C. Here's C, 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's our major third. For a perfect fifth, you would go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 half steps. So I can pick any note, and let's say I pick an A flat, which is this middle black key. The same applies. If I were to try to find a major third from A flat, you go up 4 keys. Whoops. And there we have our happy major third interval again. Go up a few more, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and you find your perfect fifth. That is kind of what I was trying to explain when we were talking about the construction of the perfect, or the circle of fifths, and you get to the point where you get to a B, and your next note in the perfect, or in the circle of fifths, is an F sharp. That is because when we go from B and try to find our perfect fifth, you go up 7 keys, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and it is the first time where we have one black note, or one white note, and then one black note. And that is the actual perfect fifth that is off of the B. So we know how to find a major third and a perfect fifth. That is what makes up a major triad. So C major in root position is C, E, and G. And when we play these triads, usually what's comfortable for me is, if I'm just playing a triad, to use the thumb for the root note, middle finger for the middle note, and the pinky for the top note. When we start to get into full octave chords, and you have to play 2 C's, for example, or you play a repeat note of whatever's on the bottom, then this is C, E, G, and then with a C on the top. So then my fingering changes quite considerably, I guess, where the C is played with the thumb, the index finger covers the E, middle plays the G, and my pinky plays the top C. But it is kind of a subjective thing where all of our hands are different. They're different sizes. You're able to stretch to different intervals more comfortably or not, depending on how big or long, or really how agile your fingers are, and how flexible they are. So what works for one person may not work for another, and especially if you're dealing with someone that's quite young and has, small child-sized hands, it can be actually really hard for them to even be able to make a basic triad. So there is definitely a limit to the size of the chords that you are able to play, really at any time in your life. Like right now, I have in my hand, I can do up to a major ninth, which is good. It's good, but compared to some people with even larger hands, they can, maybe stretch a few more keys than I can. So that is always going to be the reality. There's always someone with ridiculous piano hands that can just do ungodly things. There's some famous classical composers that wrote a lot of very, very, very difficult piano music just simply because their hands were huge, and they didn't care if you could play it or not. If they could play it, they're gonna write it. And there's some crazy piano music, especially in classical, in the classical genre, that have crazy hand stretching. But what I would say is you don't want to do anything that is going to hurt your hand. If it feels uncomfortable, if it feels like you're stretching your tendons too much, if it hurts, don't do it. Yeah, you do have to be quite careful with your hands and how you play, especially with the piano. You can really damage your hands if you practice for a really long time and just don't aren't conscious of protecting your ligaments and hands. So if it hurts, don't do it. But so we have our C major triad. The next thing to talk about, now that we know what a triad is the couple of inversions that we can get from just these three notes. So when I refer to an inversion, this C major here is in the root position. So it's not really an inversion, but it is the kind of most basic way to play this chord. In the order of the notes is C, E, and G. But we can take that C, E, and G and rearrange them in a couple different ways. So if we put the E on the bottom, and then we go to the G and put the C on the very top, this is what we call the first inversion. So this is when we have the third, or rather the major third of this chord on the bottom. So that's now our root note, but it's not the root of the chord. That's what gets kind of tricky with inversions, because this is still a C major chord. It's just played in a different order. So we have E, G, and C for a first inversion of the C major chord. And we also have a second inversion where we have the G on the bottom. That would go G, C, E. And the fingerings for both of these are slightly different. You have some, again, kind of freedom in exactly which fingers feel best to your hand. For my hand, for this first inversion chord, I use thumb on the bottom, index for the G, and my pinky plays the C. And for the second inversion, I am most comfortable with this C major second inversion with the thumb on the bottom, the middle finger playing the C, and the pinky playing the E on top. But again, it is subjective and depends on your hand and what feels good to you. But generally, you're going to use your two outside fingers for the outside notes, and then something in the middle to be able to play whatever middle note you got to play. So that is root position, first inversion, and second inversion of a C major chord. Now let's talk about minor. So what makes up a minor triad is a root, a minor third, and a perfect fifth. So very close to our major chord, but the major third becomes a minor third. And what that means is we lower the middle note by 1/2 step. So in order to find a minor third interval, you go up 3 keys. And in this case, that is the note E flat. And when we play C, E flat, and G, we get our C minor chord. Inversions for minor are very similar, where we start with the first inversion with the third as the bottom note. It's easiest to memorize like what makes up a certain inversion by memorizing what note is on the bottom, and it's good to know what's on the top too. But really, just knowing that root position, the root is on the bottom, first inversion, the third is on the bottom, and second inversion, the fifth is on the bottom, that will get you pretty dang far in helping memorize these things. So our root position, we have C, E flat, and G. Our first inversion, we have E flat, G, and C. And our second inversion, we have G, C, and E flat. And you'll notice that, again, these sound like the exact same chord, especially when we put a root on the very bottom. I'm going to do that with my left hand here. So we go, here's a C minor, here's a C minor, and there's a C minor. Right, so they're all C minors, and we're all using the same three notes. But the inversions, we use inversions for many different reasons. Sometimes it's just a artistic choice. Sometimes we want a certain note to be on the bottom of a voicing or on the top of a voicing, definitely. Depending on what's going on in the melody in a song, we might choose a certain inversion in order to kind of make the chords that are in the background of our melody fit much more smoothly along with the melody. And using inversions can also create what we call nice voice leading. So voice leading is when, well, we're going to get there when we talk about 1-4-1-5-1 progressions in a second. So let's see, we covered C minor and its inversions. Let's go, I guess, to, well, let's talk about diminished and augmented and suspended triads as well. So diminished is diminished chords, or diminished triads are a very, very powerful tool, but they have kind of like a what you might hear as like an ugly or just tense sound to them. So what makes up a diminished triad is a series of minor thirds. So if we were to start at the note C, we would find a minor third, which is 3 half steps up, E flat, and then we would go from the E flat and find another major third or minor third by going up another 3 keys, and we get a G flat. Very tense, unresolved. And this structure can be inverted as well, where we have C, E flat, and F sharp, or G flat, G flat, and we can do a first inversion of this where we have E flat, G flat, and C. And we can also have one where it's G flat, C, and E flat. So those are some diminished triads and inversions. And then augmented chords are made up of a series of major thirds. So when we go to our first major third from C by going up 4 keys, we get to the note E. And then we go up another 4 keys and we get this G sharp. And this also sounds very tense, but it also has many harmonic functions in music. Yeah, it's a very, very useful structure as well, for many different reasons. So this can also have inversions, right? This is our root position with the C on the bottom, but we can put the E on the bottom, and we would get E, G sharp, and C. Or we can have G sharp, C, and E as well. no matter which way we arrange this one, it's always going to be a series of major thirds. So these are just all consecutive major third intervals. And then the last one is suspended triads. So there's two primary suspended chords. There's a couple more, but it's going to get too complicated. So we have what we call a sus4 and a sus2 triad. Now, what a suspended chord is a chord that doesn't have a third. So instead of, if we were to start at the note C, instead of going up to a major or a minor third, this type of chord, suspended chords, doesn't have either. So instead, it has a perfect fourth and a perfect fifth in the case of a sus4 chord. That's why we call it a sus4, because we use the perfect fourth and the fifth. So this is the notes C, F, and G. It's got a really nice sound, and it really wants to have that F in the middle go back to an E. But the whole idea of suspended chords is sometimes not giving the listener that resolution that we're trying to create an expectation for. So that's a sus4, C, F, and G, and this can have inversions as well, where we go F, G, and C, or G, C, and F. And that G, C, F inversion, that second inversion of that, is really cool because it is a what we call chordal voicing, or a series of fourths. G to C is a perfect fourth, and C to F is also a perfect fourth. These are very useful in music, but usually useful for more complex harmony topics. So not going to go into that much right now. But a sus2 is kind of applying the same thought of where we don't have either a major third or a minor third, but we're using the second note of the scale. So this is C, D, and G. And again, there's part of our ear that wants it to go back to that major third in the middle. But sometimes, here's our fourth voicing. This is D, G, and C, and this is a first inversion of a sus2 chord. D, G, C, and then G, C, D. So between all of those different triads, we start to learn all the different inversions, and then you'll kind of quickly realize that, wow, there's a lot of different chord shapes, because we only covered a lot of the different triads that we use from the note C, but there's 11 other notes that have just as many voicings associated with that root note, and that is just not even all. There's more. So that's why in the part one, when I was saying that there's a lot of patterns and shapes that don't necessarily repeat exactly on the piano, that's what can make it tough. But when you know the rules and how to construct a certain structure, like we learned how to make a major triad and a minor triad from any key, because we know how many half steps we have to go up to find the next note, and then find the next note. When you start to know that, you don't necessarily have to know every shape and have perfect memory of those of every rule and every shape and every structure. You can just kind of create them just based on knowing the rules of what you're looking for. All right. So next thing we're going to talk about is 1-4-1-5-1s. So in a given song, let's stick with C major for now. This is kind of a bit of a music theory thing, but when I'm referring to 1-4-1-5-1, that is the roots of the different chords that we have in a given chord progression. So when we start from a C major triad, this is our 1 chord, right? This is our home in the key of C. And when we go to the 4 chord, that means that we're going to a chord that has the root that is the 4th note of the C major scale. So the 4th note in the C major scale is F. So when we go to a 4 chord, quote unquote, we're going to a chord that has F in the as its root. So if we start with a C chord and then we keep this same major structure and we go starting from the root F, we have the notes F, A, and C. And that is the 4 chord in the key of C major. It is a very important chord. It's used all the time, and it is what is considered a subdominant chord in the key of C. This is getting a little bit out there, but just know that it's a very important chord for now. So if we go from C to F, and then we go back to C, that's our 1-4-1, and then we have 5-1 we gotta find. So our 5 chord is when we go with our C major scale up to the 5th note, G, and make that our root, and also play a major triad. This is our 5 chord, G, B, and D, and that's a G major triad. So if we go back to the very beginning of our progression, 1 to F, 4, back to C for 1, up to G for the 5, and then back to C, that is a 1-4-1-5-1 chord progression. Now, the way that I just played that was with just root position chords. Remember what I said about inversions is that a lot of the times we use them in order to create better voice leading. And voice leading, you're about to learn what it is where instead of picking my whole hand up and having to jump a bunch of keys and we're kind of playing notes that aren't really close to what our first chord was, right? It's much higher in pitch. We can rearrange this F chord in order to allow our hand to stay in the same place, just about. So if I play this C major triad, we can have an F major triad with the second inversion where the C is on the bottom and we have F and A. So it's C, F, and A, and that's a F major triad, but in the second inversion. And that second inversion allows us to keep this C on the bottom in our F chord instead of playing the C up at the top, up at the next octave. So this keeps a what we call common tone, and that is a great thing for good voice leading. Common tones are our friends. So if we keep the C and just move our other 2 fingers up 1 key, we get our F and our A. So we only have to move 2 fingers rather than our whole hand in order to get to an F chord. And shifting back to the C is quite easy as well. We just leave our thumb where it is and go back and forth. When we play a G chord, the best voice-led G chord that is right around where our hand is right now is the first inversion of the G chord, where we have B, D, and G. So we keep, we were coming from a C chord, so we keep that G on the top and just lower our other two notes by one key. And there's a G major in the first inversion, B, D, and G. And then we can come right back to C again. So this 1-4-5 progression, we have a root position C major chord, a second inversion F major chord, back to our root position C, to a first inversion G, and back to root position C. And this is a very powerful tool because of how often we use the 4 and the 5 chord in many different songs. This can also be done with a minor key. So if we were to go to the relative minor of C, that is the key of A minor. And if you don't know the background and why that is, just go back to my earlier videos. So it is found from the 6th degree of the major scale, but I'm not going to go into the full explanation here. So A minor, again, we have this in root position. Then when we go up to our 4 chord from A, we would go to D. So A is our 1 chord, D minor is going to be our 4 chord. So again, we keep the note on the bottom the same and just move up our other 2 fingers by 1 key. So we get A, D, and F. And this is a D minor in the second inversion. Then we come back to our root position A minor. And our 5 chord is a E minor. There's E. And in order to do this E minor with good voice leading, we would put it in the first inversion, just like we did with the major chords, and that would be G, B, and E. So we have 1 root position A minor, D minor, or the 4 chord in second inversion, back to our root position 1 chord, A minor, and then to a first inversion E minor, G, B, and E, and then we would return to A minor once more. The last thing that we're going to talk about in this video is the harmonic minor scale, because when we're in a minor key, normally the 5 chord in the key of A minor would be E minor. But ever since hundreds of years ago, classical composers used what is called the leading tone. We used the leading tone instead of a flat 7 on the 5 chord. Now that's a bunch of jargon that doesn't really make sense yet, but we're going to just explain it with the keys themselves. So we have A minor, D minor, A minor. And when we go to the 5 chord like we just did, it was G, B, and E. And this is an E minor chord. But ever since hundreds of years ago, classical composers just borrowed from a similar minor scale called the harmonic minor scale, which we haven't really covered yet, but it has a what we call a raised seventh degree. So instead of a flat 7, we have a natural 7. None of that is very important. It's just about the sound and what makes up the chord. So we go A minor, D minor, A minor, and instead of playing our E minor, we can raise the third. So instead of having a minor third on the bottom of our chord, we can raise this by one note, and that'll be a major third. So this is a major triad now. So we changed our 5 chord from a minor chord to a major chord. But what this does for the harmony is creates really good voice leading, or a leading tone. This is what we consider a leading tone, which is one key below the center of our scale, or the tonic. So instead of our E minor, we have an E major, and then when we resolve back to the A minor, that leading tone resolves right back to our tonic of the key, or the root. So it has more of a tension or a pull to this A than just a regular G. Right? And we really hear that when we can hear the progression in full. So, this is a creative choice that you can make anytime you're playing a song in a minor key. You can use either the 5 chord as a minor chord, or you can make your 5 chord a major triad, or really what it is a dominant 7 chord. So instead of an E minor, we use what we call E7. We haven't really talked about 7th chords yet, but that will be definitely a part of our part 3 next time we do piano. So we're building up to it. But when we raise this third and we get our E major triad, we can also include one other note that is the 7th, the flat 7, which is a D. And when we have all 4 of these notes, this is what we call a dominant 7 chord. So if we were to play A minor, D minor, A minor, E7, and then back to A minor, then you can really start to hear why this has such a powerful sound, and it's been used in classical music and countless songs since then. So if we go A minor, D minor, A minor, E7, this is a first inversion E7, and then back to our A minor, you can really start to hear some nice harmony. So that concludes that. Now, when we're in a major key, the 5 chord, if you remember, is major, and it's also a dominant 7 as well. When we get into the 7th chords, which we'll talk about next time. But the major scale, we can't necessarily just change our 5 chord without it really sticking out, and it doesn't work quite as naturally as changing the 5 chord in a minor key. And this is because of a very complicated topic and term called modal interchange, where we borrow chords from different scales and different keys, and if we put them in the context of our C major, our C minor chord, or songs, a song in C major or a song in C minor, and we're pulling from other scales and other chords and stuff. That's what we call modal interchange, and that's kind of what we're doing. We're borrowing from the harmonic minor scale, and we're borrowing this leading tone, that G sharp. So I know that was a lot of theory, and if you are like brand new to music theory, you're probably going to want to go back and watch that again, watch parts of this again, just to try to get a little bit better of an understanding. Hopefully I explained it okay, but there's a lot of like technical terms, and when you don't know your intervals really well, it's hard to know triads. And when you don't know your triads well, it's really hard to know your seventh chords. So there's kind of a progression of having to understand what a key is, then you understand what a scale is, then you understand what a triad is, then a seventh chord, and then you get into other stuff like modal interchange and all that. So there is a pretty specific path that you gotta kind of understand, or a progression of understanding that is going to help you kind of grasp this in full. I covered kind of aspects of, right, the key, the scale, the triads, and modal interchange all in one video. So that's like, it's a lot to understand just in one go. So just be patient. We're going to talk much more music theory and stuff with piano as we go. So don't feel like you have to understand it the first time. It takes a few times having it explained to you in a couple different ways. And it's always good to hear it in a musical context as well. So next time you're listening to a song and you can tell that it's in a minor key, try to listen to see, is that 5 chord, is it just a regular minor chord, or does it have that extra tension and pull? And that probably means that they're using a 5 chord that is a dominant 7 and not a minor chord. So that is it for this video. We'll do another piano one in a few weeks, but next week I guess is bass, so we'll do another bass video next week. Thanks for checking it out, and I'll see you soon.